made it. Hats off to everybody who's here with me today to talk about the books that I read in 2023, my reading year, everything that happened. Not everything that happened, but most of the things that happened. I wanted to make this video today, not only because it's fun and because it's trendy, but also because I only started my booktube journey very recently, and so there's a lot that y'all are missing about my reading year that I want to catch you up on. It's only fair. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to talk stats. We're going to talk the best books that I read this year. We're going to talk the most disappointing books that I read this year. And I have a couple other fun tricks up my sleeve that you might want to stick around for. So sit back, grab a drink, grab a snack, enjoy the ride. Let's get into the stats. First and foremost, I want to talk about the statistics of my year. I used several different tracking methods because that's just how I roll. I use Goodreads, I use Storygraph. I also use Notion to track my reading as well because I have a database for it, and I actually got my Notion template from Kara's bookshelf here on YouTube, the other Kara that I know of on YouTube here. She has a wonderful reading tracker template for sale. I think she just recently updated it. It's only a couple bucks. It comes in super handy. It's really easy to use. And she has a whole video talking about how to use it and what Notion is. So I definitely recommend that video. For today's video, I want to talk about some of the Storygraph statistics that they have on here. I also have this really cute myyearinbooks.com graphic that kind of sums it up more succinctly, but to get into the nitty-gritty, I'm going to be using Storygraph today to talk to you guys about it. I read 106 books in 2023, which equates to approximately 36,406 pages. I say approximately because I read a lot of audiobooks this year, so I didn't actually read that many pages. And I also listened to my audiobooks on 1.5 speed, so the hours listened to audiobooks function might be a little bit off too. But that equates to around, I believe, over 60,000 minutes read, which is crazy. That's awesome. I read more than I listened to music this year, according to Spotify Wrapped. 92% of my books were fiction, which is 98 of those books. Approximately 8% of those books were nonfiction, with a total of 8 books. 8 nonfiction books read, which is more than last year, and I'm proud of myself for that. Some of my favorites were nonfiction books this year. I also like this genre breakdown. Most of the books I read fell into the fantasy category, the contemporary literature category, and romance, which is interesting because I'm not usually a romance reader, but it definitely found my little niche of romance books that I like. So the next one that we can see is the format of books that I read. So I read 43% of books in print, like from the library, or books that I've owned. 36% of books I read this year were audio, and some of those were tandem reads as well, but I counted them as audiobooks just to see how many audiobooks I was reading. And then 21% of the books I read this year were digital on my iPad, Kindle Unlimited, Libby, just ebooks. So my top authors this year were Ali Hazelwood, Rachel Smythe, Talia Hibbert, Tatsuki Fujimoto, Tracy Dion, and N.K. Jemisin. For those last two, those were just books in a series. So I read Legendborn and I read 2 of the 5th season series, which is the Broken Earth trilogy books. I did not finish that series, but we will get to that. The last little stat I want to talk to you guys about is the star ratings section. I had an average rating of 3.59, which is right smack dab average. I rated 16 books 5 stars, 40 books 4 stars, 1 book 3.5 stars, 38 books 3 stars, 2 books 2.5 stars, and I rated 9 books 2 stars. I did not have any 1 stars this year, which is great. Real quick, there are a couple stats from my Notion tracking that I want to talk to you about. My most read month was December with 16 books. My least read months, there's a tie. It's April and July for 4 books read in a month. So I was averaging about 8.83 books a month. So we'll round it up to 9 books a month. Out of the 106 books that I read this year, 46 of them were from the library that I have tracked. It might be more than that. Okay, so now with the stats out of the way, I want to talk to you about the best books that I read this year. I have picked 23 books to mention to you. 12 of those books were my favorite book of the month, and I'll tell you which month each book correlated with. And then I have 11 extra books because 23 favorite books, why not? Not all of these are 5-star books, but I consider 4-star books to be favorites of mine too. The rating that I give a book really just has to do with what I felt after I finished that book. And sometimes that can change after you've read a book. If it's been a while since you read a book and it's still on your mind, I consider that to be a best book or a favorite book. So what we're gonna do real quick is I'm gonna tell you about the books that I consider the best of 2023, and then we are going to do a bracket of the 12 favorites of the month to find my favorite book of the year, because I still haven't decided, so I thought it would be fun to do that with you live. But first, let's talk about the 23 best books of 2023. Okay. So, little disclaimer, I only own 2 of these books, so the rest of them are going to be just on the screen here. You know, that's what happens when you read a lot of books from the library and you read a lot of audiobooks. The best book of January was Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. This is the sequel to Ninth House, which is right there, that I also own. I pre-ordered this book, so it was like one of the first ones that I actually got in 2023. And I just really loved this book because the world and the story that Leigh Bardugo has created in the Ninth House realm, or the Alex Stern series is what it's called, is so intriguing. It's bizarre, it's creepy, it's unsettling, and it's just kind of magical in a really creepy way. I really enjoyed my time with this book, and I am super excited to see how this series wraps up, because we are definitely left wanting more after the second book. The best book of February was Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Bally Kaur Jaswal. This book took me by surprise. It was one of the first books that I listened to on audiobook in 2023. This book is set in West London in a Punjabi community. So Nikki, our main character, is looking for a new lease on life, kind of. She takes a job teaching writing, but there is a miscommunication about what the class is supposed to be. And so she ends up with a bunch of these Punjabi widows who want to learn English literacy, but she thought she was signing up to teach a creative writing class. So they kind of merge the two together, and the widows start telling these erotic stories to each other. It's a story about community. It was raunchy, it was touching, it was slice of life, and I got to learn more about a culture that I'm not exposed to in my daily life at all. And it was just a really fun book to listen to on audio, and I loved it. The best book that I read in March was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's about time that I read this book, and I am so glad that I did. I also read this one on audio because this one has a full cast of characters. I also read this one around the time that the TV show came out, so I read it and then I started watching the show. It was a very immersive experience for me, and I just loved it. The band reminds me a lot of Fleetwood Mac, which is one of my favorite bands ever. So reading kind of a fictionalized version of what life might have been like in the 70s to be a rock star and in the public eye and battling all of these inner demons, but also trying to live your life authentically and follow your dreams. It was, yeah, I mean, we all know this story by now, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you pick this one up and listen to it on audiobook. My favorite book of April was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. I, of course, always hear mixed things about this book, but ultimately I really liked it because it was just a fun story and I had a good time. I had a good time with the story. Again, I listened to this one on audiobook. It was a big year for audiobooks for me. I think a lot of my favorites ended up being audiobooks, to be honest with you, because they're so immersive and easy to consume, and they, I don't know, for some reason make the touching things so much more touching. So anyway, Lessons in Chemistry is another really popular one that has a TV show now that I haven't watched. It was idealistic at times for sure, but it was also hopeful, and it was also inspiring in ways. Like Elizabeth, she has a really tough time and she grabs life by the balls and makes the most of it, even though everything is against her at some points. I loved the talking dog. Okay, I loved the magicalness of that, and I think one of my only critiques of the book is that it did feel disingenuous to, the history of what actually happened during that time period. But it's a fictional story, so none of that ever would have happened, but it's a story. So I enjoyed that version of history that I read in this historical fiction. May's favorite book was Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This one is a contemporary literary fiction love story type of thing. It's a, just 20-something puttering around, figuring their life out. That's one of my favorite genres. Or one of my favorite, subgenres of books. This one reminds me a lot of one of my favorites from last year, Cleopatra and Frankenstein. So the main character in this one is, she works in a restaurant, and I immediately resonated with that because I've worked in a restaurant before too. Know how that life is, especially when you're in your 20s. She has a couple of beaux in the story, and they have their pros and cons, of course, but really it's all about her coming to terms with grief, the grief that she's experiencing after her mother passes away, and her stepping into herself and figuring out what she really wants out of life, which is, that she doesn't know what she wants out of life. So yeah, I thought it was touching. I thought it was really well written, and I really, again, enjoyed my time with this book. June's favorite was The Music of Bees by Eileen Garvin. This one I impulsively picked up from the library because I saw it and I liked the cover, and it is a found family story that reminds me of Remarkably Bright Creatures, which was one of my favorites from last year again. In it, the main character is a 40-something widow, and she owns an orchard, and she has kind of an apiary going on, and she needs help. So she hires a couple of kids, young men, to help her one summer with her apiary around the orchard, around the property that she owns, and they become this little mismatched found family. One of the main characters is an 18-year-old boy who had an accident and is disabled now and has a wheelchair. And then the other one who is part of the crowd is a boy a young man who just got out of prison, and he's just wayward and doesn't really know where to go. But they form these connections, and become interwoven in each other's lives, and it's just really beautiful. It was touching. It almost made me cry, and I really liked it. July's favorite was The Lost Vintage by Anne Ma. This one might be a top contender for favorite of the year because I think about this book constantly. It is about a woman who is a sommelier, and she is training to take her Master of Wine exam, which it's not a higher ed degree, but it's just a certification that you can take that makes you a prestigious sommelier and the all-knowing at wine. And I turned 21 in July, and so that thus was the beginning of my journey into becoming a wine connoisseur myself. And I read this book and I was just immediately transported to France, where this book takes place. Her family owns a vineyard there, and she, for some reason, decides to go there. And the estate that the family owns has some historical World War II secrets going on, and the main character uncovers the secrets and learns more about her family's history, and it's just really haunting, beautiful, and it was very atmospheric in a way that I loved, and I want to find more books like this. Okay, in August, I didn't have the best reading month, so the favorite that I picked was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I still like this book, don't get me wrong. It definitely wasn't the best book that I read this year, but it was memorable, and so that's why it's making this list, of course, and it was the best one that I read in August. So I'm sure we all know what The Silent Patient is about by now. It is about a woman who allegedly committed a crime and will not speak to anyone because something crazy happened, and she's in this mental facility, and the main character is her doctor, and they uncover a lot of secrets together, and it was gripping. I mean, it was pretty, like, I had a good time uncovering what was happening and listening to the story. I was very engrossed in it while I was listening. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't like the most groundbreaking thing I've ever read, but I'm glad that I did because people have been telling me to read this book for years, and I finally did. And I don't think that it necessarily deserves all the hype, but you know, if you like this type of story, then you should definitely read it. September's favorite book was Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. This book was awesome. Caitlin Doughty is a mortician, and this book is her memoir about becoming a mortician and learning about the funeral industry, and she has a lot of really funny and deadpan anecdotes to share in this story, and it was just really eye-opening and kind of gave me a new perspective on, you know, American death and the popularization of how funerals are today. And I just loved it. I mean, this was a super engaging nonfiction, so if you are on the fence about reading more nonfiction in 2024, I would definitely recommend this one because it's very, very entertaining and you learn a lot too. Another nonfiction favorite in October was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This was another one that I have been meaning to read for ages and ages, and I finally did, kind of impulsively in October, and I loved this book so much. It was really, really, really touching. It was very relatable, and not in a way that's like gratuitous. You know, this book is about Carmen Maria Machado's trauma and her emotional abuse that she lived through in a relationship and how she overcame it. Not necessarily overcame it, but how she processed it, and she processed it by writing this book. It's told in a series of kind of short stories, kind of essays that bring fairy tale and folklore into the storytelling aspect of it and kind of debunk some of the things that manipulative people will do to make you feel disoriented in the same way that fairy tales and folk tales do. So that was super interesting. It was just masterfully written, and I love Carmen Maria Machado now. I have one more nonfiction favorite for this year, which I read in November, and it is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I have always been a John Green girly, you know, since I was a kid, and I read The Fault in Our Stars and Looking for Alaska. And this one came out right after the pandemic. And he did write a lot about the pandemic in this book, but it wasn't in a way that made me, like, you know, throw it across the room and be like, I'm done with you, John Green. Why would you, like, you know, writers are going to write about the pandemic because, you know, we write about what affects us, we write about what we've experienced. And I really liked what he had to say about his experiences, especially as a person who has depression. And John Green really, I mean, I just love the way that he writes about stuff that you never in a million years might have wanted to learn about, but now the way that he sparks interest in these random topics that he brings up is so engaging and entertaining. And basically what he's doing in this book is reviewing different aspects of the Anthropocene, which is the era of the world that we live in. So he talks about, like, ginkgo biloba trees. He talks about hot dogs. He talks about the Indianapolis 500. He talks about, like, all of these different things that have touched his life in some way and affected him, and he brings it to you in a very digestible manner. Another one that I listened to on audio, and I highly, highly, highly recommend that you listen to on audio because he narrates it himself. And you can tell how affected he is by his writing and his, again, this is the way that he's processed what he's been through. And yeah, I just loved it. I loved every second of it. It's one of those books that I'm, like, considering going back to over and over again as, like, a comfort read. I'm very happy I read this one. The last favorite I picked for December was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I actually talked about this book in my Reindeer Readathon vlog, so you can kind of see the excitement that I had after I read this one. But all I will say right now is that I just loved this one. It was my favorite romance of the year. It was realistic in a way that didn't make me cringe, but made me be like, oh yeah, that's my life, you know, or this could be my life. Wow, I really relate to that. And I just liked the story. I liked the magical aspects of it. I really liked the characters, and I liked the setting, and I really just loved everything about it. I thought it was exactly what I needed to read when I read it, and yeah, it was everything that I like in a romance. If you want to hear me talk about that one a little bit more, it's in my last reading vlog that I did, so go check that one out. Okay, we're gonna talk about a few more to wrap up my 23 favorites of 2023. In no particular order, I just want to mention these. I would have first mentioned State of Wonder by Ann Patchett. This book was really a journey. I mean, literally, it was a journey. It's about a scientist's journey to the Amazon, and they are trying to find a cure for something. I don't remember exactly what that was, but there was just the way that Ann Patchett wrote about the journey and about the people that the main character met along the way and about the things that they learned from the local people living there and about the experiences that the main character had gone through to get them to that place. I just really loved the book. It made me really savor Ann Patchett's writing, and so I had to put it on my favorites list because I think Ann Patchett is going to be an auto read author for me now. Then I have Rouge by Mona Awad. I recently read this one as well. And Bunny by Mona Awad is one of my favorite books ever. And it wasn't like as highly rated when I had first read it, but it's a book that I think about constantly and a book that I'm constantly trying to find something comparable to match that reading experience I had when I read that book, and Rouge did that for me. I have heard a lot of people say that this book didn't give them that bunny experience, but for me it did. And one of the things that I loved so much about Rouge was the way that she actually wrote the story, like the syntax of the sentences and the composition of the story itself gives you a very on edge feeling, because she writes in a lot of sentence fragments and a lot of things that don't make sense. She's slipping words constantly for things that are pretty close but not quite the meaning of what she's trying to get at, and it gives you a very disorienting vibe, but I thought it was genius. And the story overall was really confusing and kind of like, what the fuck is going on? But that was the whole point of it. So if you're looking for something like that, please do not pass this one up. It gave me the bunny vibe. So what do you have to lose, really? I mean, if it doesn't, it doesn't, but yeah, it was great. Yellowface by R.F. Kuang has to make it on this list. I mean, this book was very highly anticipated for me this year, and it did not disappoint me. I blew through it. I thought the main character was despicable, but also I couldn't tear my eyes off the page because it was like watching a car crash. And some of the literary references went a little bit over my head because I'm not in the publishing industry, but I can definitely see a lot of where the critiques are coming from and how they affect, BIPOC authors and marginalized authors, and like the way that the publishing industry just permeates the culture that we live in and upholds those values systematically is a problem, and this book is a social commentary on that. R.F. Kuang really looks those things in the face and spits in them through this book in a very straightforward way, in a very satirical way. So if that's not your cup of tea, you might not like this one, but personally, I really love a book that is sassy, and tongue-in-cheek and satirical and paradoxical. I love that. So this one was definitely a favorite for me. Another favorite I have is Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. This book was so fun. It was another kind of found family vibe. The young Mary Jane becomes a live-in nanny for this little girl, and it's set in the 70s. The family that she's nannying for is kind of offbeat, and they have like rock star best friends that live with them for the summer. And Mary Jane comes from a very conservative family, so she's at first kind of off-put by those things, but then she falls in love with the lifestyle that they lead of being free-spirited and open-minded and, living life on your own terms versus what other people expect of you. And I just really liked the coming-of-age story that this one had, and the found family vibes, and it was emotional, and it was pure, and it was really fun. Great summer read. The next favorite that I have, and the last book that I actually own to show you, is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I hate that I have this cover with the freaking peacock thing on it, but whatever. I think I actually did watch this show. I ended up watching it. This book was awesome. It's Dolly Alderton's memoir about, her 20-something coming of age, and like I said, I already mentioned that I love that. Love those type of stories, and this is stuff that really happened to Dolly, and I found it so relatable and insightful and witty and poignant. And it's about love lost and love gained in different ways, and different people in different ways that are unexpected, and just about the living life. Live, laugh, loving. It's Dolly Alderton, Live, Laugh, Loving. So I obviously highly recommend this one. If you haven't read it, it's a no-brainer. I think every 20-something girl and man, boy, and they, them should read this. Next up is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This one was another really kind of sad and silly book. The main character is somebody who has perplexing social graces and doesn't really relate to people easily, and she has a really traumatic past. And so it's about her life, her perspective on things, and how her perspective shifts after experiencing some life events that bring her closer to other people. And she processes her trauma, she processes her grief, and it was slice of life, and it was sad, but in a really good way, and in a really memorable way, and in a relatable way, and that's why I liked it. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This one was one of the first books that I read in 2023, and it was another one of the first audiobooks that I read in 2023, and I had a really great time with it. It was unlike anything I'd ever read before because it's very scientific and nitty-gritty and fast-talking science teacher vibes, but I learned a lot from it, and it made me feel smart, and it made me hopeful. It was a hopeful story, but also kind of a nail biter, but mostly just hopeful, and so that was nice. The characters in this are very lovable and very touching, the way that they relate to each other in such a unique way. And yeah, it was one of my favorite sci-fis probably of all time at this point. It's a really great one. If you're not a sci-fi person, I would definitely read this one because it's more about the person's experiences than it is about all the science at the end of the day, and I appreciated that for sure. Next up, we have Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. This one took me by surprise, not because I didn't think I was gonna like it, but because it was so rich, just like a black cake. And the story was really, really, really substantial. It was substantial. It was twisty in unexpected ways. And I liked the way that it was told in the flashbacks of the mother telling her story to her children after she has passed away, and the reactions that the children have to the story that changed their lives forever. It's a family saga, but in a very personal way, because it's the mother like recounting her entire life and bearing her soul to her kids after she has passed away. So it was very unique in that way and very sad and touching, and I think everybody should read this book for sure. Another one of the first books I read this year, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This book was fantastic. It is about a young Black girl who nannies for a rich white family. It's about the way that people view you when you come from different backgrounds and make different stories for yourself. And it's also about the way that racism shapes everything in our society, and the way that our history can come back to haunt us if we're not careful. And it's also about what we give up for motherhood and what society implies on us, and how that reflects how we reflect those things, whether we like it or not. And it was just really eye-opening and jaw-dropping and dramatic and awesome. Then we have The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. This book was about grief, and it was about family, and it was about a fabulous gay man who takes on raising his niece and nephew for a summer because his brother's wife, who happened to be his best friend a long time ago, she passed away unexpectedly or suddenly. And so it's about all of them reconciling with that, and this estranged uncle figure reconciling with his niece and nephew, and also reconciling with the fact that he's ended his career, but he doesn't really know what's next for him. And so this is him kind of like reluctantly branching out into a new life. And it was really sweet. It was funny as hell, and it was just very poignant. Again, I don't know if you can tell, I like a sad story that will teach me something about grief somehow. The last book I have to mention to you for 2023 is When We Lost Our Heads by Heather O'Neill. I have actually read a Heather O'Neill book before a long time ago called The Girl Who Was Saturday Night. and I didn't realize until I picked this book up that I had read from her before. This book is a historical fiction about two girls who grow up in Montreal, and I think it's Montreal. Yeah, it's like it takes place in sometime in the 1800s, and one of the girls comes from a very aristocratic, rich family, and the other come from a disgraced, slightly less rich family. And they have an incident that tears them apart, but they have this unbroken bond together, and it's kind of romantic, very competitive with each other in a strange way, trying to prove themselves to one another and themselves. And they just have this really, really, really close relationship. And I thought the book was it was deadpan and very tongue-in-cheek, and it was also kind of satirical of the time that this was taking place. So the overall tone of it was just very kind of like dark comedy, eat the rich vibes. And the writing was really good, and the characterization of the characters was really messy. And yeah, I recommend this one if you are into like if you liked the movie Saltburn, which by the way I recently watched and fucking loved it, you should read this one. So those are the 23 books that were my favorite of 2023. What I want to do now is I found this bracket created by a very nice book on Instagram, and she shared it on her stories. So I'm going to put my 12 top books through the bracket to try and figure out what my favorite book of the year was, live with you, because I have contemplated this for so long and I haven't been able to figure it out. So we're gonna do it now. We're gonna put all of the contemplation to rest, and we're gonna know what my favorite book of the year was. So first, I'm going to just write all of the books for what month they were. Now that I've written down all of my favorites from the year, we're gonna do this. Okay. So I have to pick between three. So between Hellbent, Punjabi Widows, and Daisy Jones and the Six. I think I'd have to pick Hellbent and Daisy Jones. All right. Lessons in Chemistry, Writers and Lovers, and the Music of Bees. Okay, I think I'm gonna choose Lessons in Chemistry and Writers and Lovers. All right, The Lost Vintage, Silent Patient, and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Definitely The Lost Vintage and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, because I already said The Silent Patient definitely was my fave of those. All right, this one's gonna be hard. In the Dream House, The Anthropocene Reviewed, and The 7-Year Slip. All right. I think we're going, yep, that's what we're doing. All right. So now that we've got these out of the way, this is what we're working with. So between Hellbent and Daisy Jones, I think I'm gonna have to go with Daisy Jones. Okay. Between Lessons in Chemistry and Writers and Lovers, I'm definitely going with Writers and Lovers. Okay, between The Lost Vintage and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, I think it's gonna be The Lost Vintage. And then between Anthropocene Reviewed and The 7-Year Slip, oh my god. it might have to be the Anthropocene Reviewed. All right, so that's the top four. The top four: Daisy Jones and the Six, Writers and Lovers, The Lost Vintage, and the Anthropocene Reviewed. Oh my god, this is way harder than I thought it was gonna be. Okay. Between Daisy Jones and the Six and Writers and Lovers, I have to pick one. I think I'm gonna go with Writers and Lovers. Okay. Oops. Okay. The Lost Vintage and the Anthropocene Reviewed. Okay. Anthropocene Reviewed. Guys, I think that means that my top read is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. Wow. Honestly, I kind of saw this coming because when I read this book, I was like, wait, this might be one of the best books of 2023. Like, I could already tell. Wow. All right. That's it. My favorite book of 2023, y'all. The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. Okay. Let's move on. Now that we've talked about my favorite books, I do want to mention a couple of my most disappointing books. I guess you could consider these the worst books that I read in 2023, but as we saw earlier, I didn't rate anything below a 2 star, so it's not like these are the worst books I've ever read. But yeah, so I just want to mention these 3 books that disappointed me the most. The first of them being Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book, I had, I think, really high expectations for this one, and it just let me down because the writing was kind of bland. And I'm chalking this up to I didn't like the English translation of this book. So, I mean, the story was fine. It was a little bit too long for me, and I was kind of just like, what is all the hype of this book about? Because I get that Clara is an AI, and it's a commentary about what that could mean for humanity and how she has her own humanity throughout the book. But there were several points in the story where I just got lost, and I was like, what are we even talking about? Because the little girl that Clara is the companion of goes through some things that I'm kind of like, what does this have to do? What merit does this add to the story? And so I just got a little bit lost, and I was kind of disappointed at the end because I was like, I feel like I learned nothing from this book. So yeah. Then we have The Book Eaters by Sunny Dean. This one, again, was just kind of disappointing, and I felt like the plot was a little bit messy. The premise of this book is great and really intriguing. It's about these beings that subsist off of reading or eating books instead of reading them, but then they gain the knowledge of the book that they ate after they eat it. But then there's like these mutant book eaters that have to eat people instead of books, and they become weaponized, and there's kind of like a family feud going on in the book that has to do with their like their family name, and I don't know, I just kind of got lost on me because I felt like the actual plot of the story was not as great as it could have been. There was so much potential there, and I just feel like yeah, I didn't appreciate it as much as I thought I was going to. And the last book that disappointed me the most this year was Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This one, I feel kind of like on the minority of for this book because a lot of people love it and I just do not understand why, because I listened to this book and I didn't understand what happened. Maybe it was because I listened to it. I still don't, I literally still can't explain to you what the book was about and what happened in the book. It followed several different characters. There was some time travel involved. There was a pandemic involved. And I think maybe it was just because I don't really like reading about the pandemic or fictionalized events of the coronavirus pandemic that we just recently experienced. But I don't know. This book didn't make very much sense to me. It was really short and it ended very, very abruptly. And when I finished it, I was like, there's no way that can be it, because I don't know what happened. So it could be, user error on my part for that, but it could also just be that this one went over my head. I'm not gonna write off Emily St. John Mandel though. The writing was fine. It was just not very memorable to me. Like, I don't know what happened. So yeah. Piggybacking off of those, there were a few books I DNF'd this year. I'm not really gonna go too in-depth about them because these are all books that I'm soft DNFing, meaning that I want to pick them back up again one day. So when I do, I will tell you about them. But these are all books that I DNF'd this year, and yeah, I just want to mention them to you. So the first one I want to mention is actually, this is Body Neutral by Jessie Nealand. And I actually love this book. I just haven't finished it yet, and I haven't committed to, I put it on my DNF list because I didn't actually finish it this year. And obviously I am gleaning a lot of information from this, but this one is more of like an ongoing handbook type of book. It's a self-help type vibe, kind of. It's about learning to come to terms with your body and why you have body image issues, and then embracing them mindfully and learning to accept yourself, which is a journey that I am on constantly. And so I'm not putting this book down. It's just, this is a continual thing that I'm going to be working on. And I bought myself a copy because I originally started reading this from the library when we got it in, but I loved it so much that I knew I had to keep one. These two books I started reading at the beginning of the year and I just lost my vigor for. So that's I Love Dick by Chris Kraus and S by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. S is a fake book. The Ship of Theseus is the fake book. V.M. Straka is not a real author. This is kind of a really interesting idea for a book. It's the story lies within not only the fake book, but the notes that the students are leaving to each other through this found library book. And I feel like this is going to take me several reads to get through because there's so much going on here. There's ciphers, there's little postcards in here, there's notes, there's a lot of Easter eggs going on, and so this is like a project. And when 2023 first started, I wanted to do a reading vlog about this book, but that obviously never happened. And so I think, that could still happen with this book one day because I don't see very many people talking about it, and it's very interesting to me. And then I Love Dick is a novel by Chris Kraus. It is, she kind of fictionalizes herself in this book, and it's about her relationship with her partner and a third party that kind of infiltrates the relationship and they become obsessed with. And they write letters to him. This just wasn't what I wanted to read when I picked it up, so yeah. Then I have 3 more that I just didn't get to finish in 2023. The Stone Sky, which is the 3rd book in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I finished the first 2 and then I just really couldn't get into the 3rd one. I listened to all of them on audiobook, and I think by that point I had just stretched it out for so long that I was like, I can't do this right now. Not that I didn't think the Broken Earth trilogy was really great, and I still think about it sometimes, but it just wasn't where I needed to be when I was reading it. When in Rome by Sarah Adams is another one. I tried to read this, I have the ebook of this, and I tried to read it, and I tried to read it multiple times and I couldn't get into it because I've read a Sarah Adams book before, The Cheat Sheet, and I hated that book. So I wanted to give this author another chance because I've heard really, really good things about this one, but I just never really like committed to it. So what I've done is I requested a copy on Libby to listen to audio of. So hopefully if I can listen to the audiobook, I can get into it a little bit more. I'm gonna try again with that one. And then Slow Pleasure by Euphemia Russell. I own this book as well, but I don't actually own a physical copy of it. I have it on ebook. And that's another one like Body Neutral where it's kind of just an ongoing project for me. So when I finish those, I will finish them, but maybe not this year. I don't know. We'll see. The last thing I want to do for this video is give a few superlatives. I thought it'd be fun to do some paper plate awards. I've never seen anybody do that on YouTube before, and I love paper plate awards, so I thought it'd be just kind of a fun thing to end off the video with. So yeah, I just have a few I want to mention. The first one is my favorite cover of the year. This award goes to When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. I just love the cover. Just take a minute to look at this one. Yeah, I don't know. I just love the colors and the vibes and the leaves and the font. And the cover definitely drew me in when I read this one. And it wasn't like, it didn't make it on my favorites list, obviously. It was just fine. But the cover is fantastic. The most surprising book that I read this year goes to, I think I'm gonna give this award to The Lost Vintage because it ended up being the contender for one of my top favorite of the year. And when I picked this book up, I saw it on the shelf at the library. I'd never heard of it before, and I picked it up and I just fell in love with it. So I think that that one will be my most surprising of the year because, you know, I was surprised. I don't know. My favorite new author paper plate award goes to Ali Hazelwood. I loved my time with Ali Hazelwood this year. She turned me on to the romance genre, and I've read everything that she has published so far this year. And it was a great time. She's fun, she's flirty, she's fresh, she's silly, and I just really enjoy her books. So, yay. Thank you, Ali Hazelwood, for making my year great. Most deserving of the hype paper plate award. I think this paper plate award is going to go to In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Because I've heard so much hype about this book from people I know in real life, from people on YouTube, and it's genuinely one of the best books I have ever read, and I think everybody should read this one. And of course there are lots of titles that could fit this role that I read this year, like Yellowface, Daisy Jones and the Six, Black Cake, but In the Dream House I think touched me personally in a way that those books did not. And so I definitely, when I read it, I was like, yeah, this is definitely a book that deserves all of the hype it gets. So yeah. Well, that finally wraps up my 2023 wrap up. Thank you for sticking around with me. I know I talked, but I think, like I said earlier, it's important for you to know about how my reading year went, and I'm glad that I finally got all this off of my chest for you. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to see you next time. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, give me a comment. Tell me what your favorite books of the year were. I'd love to know. Let me know if you disagree with me. Let me know if you agree with me. Let me know if you have any recommendations for books I might like based off of my favorites. And yeah, that's all I got. I'm signing off, and I will see you some more in 2024. Okay.